Today on Paul's Old Crap, what we're going to do is take a look at my big box software collection. Now, I've collected a few software titles over the years, but I didn't seriously start a collection of software until earlier this year when I had a lot more disposable income and I was super bored having to house sit for some family members. And about the only thing I could do was go on eBay and browse for random things, and I ended up picking up a lot of software titles. So today we're going to take a look at what I've got in my software display inside my house, and I'll see if I can remember where I picked up most of these titles from and why I decided to buy those particular titles. So starting up at the top here, we've got a copy of Inka, which is a Sierra game. That along with The Prophecy right below it. Those two I actually picked up from a local thrift store recently for $10 each. It's a little older than the types of games I usually go for, but for that price I couldn't really pass it up. Right below that is Hoyle, some sort of card game collection. It's also a Sierra game. The fact that it has the Sierra logo on it is pretty much the only reason why I actually bought it. That was from Value Village, and I'm sure it was only like $5, so didn't really care. So we've got at the very top there the Oregon Trail. That was a recent eBay purchase. I think I probably spent around $20 on that one. I decided to pick that copy up because the Oregon Trail, I'm sure like many other kids my age, which isn't really that young, they played Oregon Trail back in the early school days, and that's a game that I did play on like a Macintosh Classic back in elementary school, so I figured I'd like to have a physical copy of it. Below that is Subwar 2050. I'd never heard of that game before, but it's a Microprose game, and that's another one of the games that I picked up for $10 at a local thrift store. And below that is a copy of Aldous Superpaint. And that particular copy up there is still sealed, although I probably will do an unboxing video of that at some point. That was an eBay purchase, and I wanted it in particular because I wanted to have a small collection of Aldous software titles. Aldous was a graphics company that was acquired by Adobe, and a lot of the titles that Adobe has today, I believe, were actually originally under Aldous, and some of those were originally under other companies that Aldous had acquired. So yeah, some interesting stuff there. Last on the end there, Return to Zork. I'd never really played any of the Zork games, but I don't know, I kind of liked the box design on that one, and it was super cheap on eBay. But the actual box itself, I was not too pleased to see how cheap quality the box is. Like, you can see at the top there, it actually opens at the top, and it's not like a clean open. Once you open that box, it's pretty much like that, unless you want to glue it back together. So was not too pleased about that quality, but I figured what the heck, I've got in my collection now. So if we start from the left, the first one we've got there is the Star Trek Omnipedia. That's still sealed, and that was an eBay purchase because I was a big Star Trek fan in the 90s, and I remember seeing that software title back when it was originally released, and I was never had enough money to actually go buy stuff like that for myself, so I figured what the heck, bought it this year, and I will eventually do a video on that. Also, same deal with the Star Trek Next Generation, A Final Unity. That's a Spectrum holobyte game, and I figured what the heck, buy that as well. And if we also look at the Starfleet Academy game, that one I wasn't too sure about, but I think it was fairly cheap, and it's from Interplay, so I like picking up games from those larger names. But I was mainly a fan of the Next Generation, and I think that game is a little older, but I'm sure I'll take a look at it at some point. And next to that, Star Trek Generations. That's a Microprose game, and that one apparently is for Windows 95. So it's you know, probably like a mid to late 90s game there. You know, I liked the movie that I'm sure the game is based on, judging by the name, so yeah, at some point I'll take a look at that as well. That game is also still sealed, and that was from eBay. I have no idea how much I paid. It probably wasn't that much though. But then moving on, the next two games next to that, the Star Wars games. We've got X-Wing versus TIE Fighter, and then we've also just got X-Wing itself. Those were pretty cheap, and I'm also a Star Wars fan from the earlier movies anyway. So yeah, I figured I'd add those to the collection. I remember playing some of those Star Wars games back in the day, so yeah, felt like adding those. And then right at the right of the video, you should be able to see the game Outpost. That's a Sierra game, and I think I remember seeing that back when it was released originally, and it's like a space simulator game as far as I know, and I kind of like those games, so I figured I'd pick that one up. That was also fairly cheap on eBay. So next to Outpost, we've got Stellar 7. That's a DOS game under Dynamics, which I believe is part of Sierra. That particular copy of the game, I believe, was a local find at a Value Village thrift store, and I think it was fairly cheap, like somewhere around $5 or $6. And I was kind of surprised when I found it, and I was glad that I found it because Stellar 7 is a game that I remember playing way back in my 486 days. So yeah, I was happy to pick that up. Next to that, Wing Commander. That's the original Wing Commander under Origin. That one, I don't think I paid too much for it, maybe about $30. But I did pick that one up because I do remember playing Wing Commander back in the 46 days as well. So that was a happy addition to my collection. And then next to that, of course, we do have Wing Commander 2 and Wing Commander 3. I think I may have played Wing Commander 2 back in the 90s, but Wing Commander 3 I don't believe I ever played, but I figured I'd add it to the collection. I'm kind of looking for number 4 as well, but it's not a huge priority. But moving on next to that, we have a copy of Myst, because everyone needs a copy of Myst if they have a big box software collection. It's just kind of one of those things that, you know, you have to have. I'm not particularly fond of the game. I believe I have played it back when it was a new game, but yeah, I wanted to have it in the collection just because no collection is complete without Myst. So I went on eBay and I looked for the absolute cheapest copy of it, and yeah, that's what's ended up in my collection there. But next to that, we do have Caesar 3 and also Caesar 2. Those are games that I like, that style of game, that simulation, like role-playing type game where you've got like ancient times. So pick those up. Let's see, I think those were both from eBay, and I mainly wanted Caesar 2, but Caesar 3 I think was also cheap enough. Figured I'd add it as well. And of course Civilization 2, which is also a very popular game. I've got that in my collection because that's also a big box game that I did have back in the 90s with my family's 486. I think my dad was more fond of that game than I ever was, but I did play it from time to time, and I figured I'd add it just for the sake of having it. Next to that, we've got, it's the Interplay 10-year anthology big box collection there. That wasn't a huge deal for me, but I figured I would just pick it up for dirt cheap on eBay, because I think it wasn't that much. I think it was probably less than $20. And there was a bunch of games that I figured I'd want to try that are part of that collection, but I didn't want to have the individual boxes for all of them because they weren't a huge deal for me. So yeah, that was cheap. Picked it up. Next to that, we've got Indycar Racing. That was from eBay, and it was impulse buy because I thought the game that I was buying was the older Indycar 500. I think it's the Indianapolis 500 game. That's the game that I remember playing years and years ago. I had a friend with a 386. We played on his computer, and then I also had it on my 486. So I saw this Indycar Racing, and it's from the same company that had the other game. I think when I saw it on eBay, I just kind of thought the game that I was buying was that older one, because I guess forgotten the actual name of the game. So I ended up with that for, you know, not a lot. I think it was $20 or $30. But when I received the game, I realized it was actually not the one I was looking for. But I do like the racing games, so, you know, it doesn't hurt to have it. And then, of course, next to that is NASCAR Racing 2. That's not a game I really cared about, but it is a Sierra game, and it was at my local Value Village thrift store for like $5, so pick that up as well. So on the next shelf down, we've got a copy of Loom. I'd never heard of this game before. This was another one of those games that I picked up for $10 a pop at a local thrift store recently. And when I was posting pictures of it on my Instagram account, I think there's more than one person who commented specifically on that game. So I suppose it was pretty popular back in the day. Yeah, I'd never heard of it or ever played it myself, but the box is complete, so I guess I got a pretty good deal on that one. Below that, though, is a copy of Descent, and that's a game that I did play myself back in the day, so I was happy to have that in my collection. And that is also, looks like, an interplay game, and I like collecting those. So these next two games, these weren't games that I was specifically looking for, but there was a local seller to me on eBay that had these listed, and these were fairly expensive for what I've been paying for the other titles in my collection. Rise of the Triad, that one I paid 75 Canadian dollars for, which I think might have been a decent deal. It's an Apogee game, and I was never expecting to find something like that in the box. It is a game that I do remember hearing about back when it was released in the 90s or whenever it was. I don't think I ever played it myself though, but yeah, that looked like it was actually a decent price. The other comparable eBay auctions for it were like over $100 Canadian, so yeah, I figured what the heck. And then below that is Hexen. That is a game that I think I probably did play maybe at least once back in the 90s, but it is, I figure, a game that I would like to add in my collection and probably do a video on that at some point. And at the end of the shelf there, we've got a copy of Virtual Pool 2, and you can see it still says the $5.99 price tag from the local Value Village. That game is still sealed, and I wasn't really looking to pick it up at all, but it is one of the games that I picked up for cheap at one of the local thrift stores, so I can't really argue for the price. And if it happens to be the only title that's at the store when I go, I usually just buy it, otherwise I've just wasted a trip there, so that's how I ended up with that. Okay, so now we're making it into my Microsoft Home collection. I really don't know why I decided to start a collection of the Microsoft Home titles. I think I was just kind of fascinated with the whole Microsoft Home marketing concept from the 90s. And back in those days, I was not actually a Microsoft fan, but yeah, I don't know. It's kind of some of the titles they had under that Microsoft Home name, it was kind of neat. So starting off at the left, we've got Return of Arcade. I don't really have any fascination with arcade games, but it's obviously in the collection because it has the blue badge on the bottom. So next to that, Microsoft Flight Simulator. It's one of the few copies that I've got. There's actually two copies you see there. There are different versions. I think the first one is maybe version 5.0 and the one next to it is 5.1. I can't remember exactly, but I do also like flight sims, so obviously I don't mind having those games in my collection. But next to that, we've got musical instruments. Figured I might check it out at some point, but it's in there because it's Microsoft Home. We've got Ancient Lands. I'm not too sure what that one's about. Probably like old civilizations or something like that. But next to that, we've got Complete Baseball. And honestly, I don't really care about the sports games at all, but yeah. Next one there is these titles, the multimedia ones, so that's one large box with those three in there, but you can actually find those individual ones in their own boxes, but these are all pretty much from eBay. So when I was locating these, I didn't really want to pay a whole lot of money to get these titles in my collection. So I saw that one for, I think, a fairly decent price, and it was much cheaper than if I tried to hunt down the individual titles in their own boxes, so I just went with that one. But next to that, we've got Dangerous Creatures. I think that's like wildlife or something like that. I'll take a closer look at some point. And then we've got some sort of fine artist title. I'm not too sure what that is. It says Create animated pictures and projects. I don't know, that one's still sealed, and that was, I think, a cheap find on eBay, and I figure I'll take a look at that at some point. So next to that, we've got a copy of Microsoft Encarta. That one there is the 1994 edition, and I think that was one of the first Microsoft Home titles that I had in my collection. And the story with that one is I actually picked it up at a thrift store in the next town from where I live, and it was from a store that doesn't really have any computer stuff at all, but I was waiting for the cashier to finish up with some customers, and I was just randomly walking through the book section, which I was not intending to check out. But in the piles of books, I saw the word Encarta, and I thought, I don't believe that's a book. And I picked it up, and sure enough, it was a full box copy of Encarta 94. So that's how that got there. Next to that is Fury 3. That is a fairly hard game to come by, at least in Canada, when I was checking up on eBay. That one I happened to come across, I think, right as the auction was listed. So I saw it, and I made an impulse buy of it. It was actually fairly cheap. I think I paid maybe $30 or $40, and that's like with shipping. And yeah, figured that was a game that I actually did play back in the 90s, so wanted to have that in the collection. Next to that, we've got Scenes Undersea Collection. That is like a screensaver pack, and that I just stumbled across randomly on eBay, and I think that was also fairly cheap, so added that. Next to that is Microsoft Space Simulator. That one, I actually tried playing it. It's like, I don't think it's really a game. It's like you operate the space shuttle or something like that, and you have to do a bunch of stuff. It looks like a fairly in-depth game though, so, or, well, not a game, like a simulation, so I didn't spend too much time on it, but... next to that, Encarta 96 World Atlas. That's another one that was just cheap on eBay, so... but next to that, though, Microsoft Bob. That one took a long time to find because the ones that were on eBay, I think there was only one copy on eBay all the times that I checked, and I think it was too much money that I was willing to spend. But I think I just added it to my watch list, and I waited and I waited. Eventually, the person added the option to submit offers because obviously nobody was buying it at the inflated price. And I threw a bit of a, not really a low ball, but I threw a price in there that I was willing to pay, and they accepted it. So that's how I ended up with a copy of Microsoft Bob, still sealed. And I will be doing a video on that at some point when I have more room in my house. Next to that is the most recent edition. It's just a copy of Microsoft Arcade. Yeah, like I said before, don't really care about the arcade games, but that's how it got to the collection, because it says Microsoft Home. And then we've also just got the non-home collection titles there. We've got Combat Flight Simulator 2. That was probably like $5 at the Value Village. Next to that is Microsoft Flight Simulator version 6 for Windows 95. I think that was also from the local thrift store, probably $5 or $6. Next to that is another copy of Microsoft Flight Simulator. That one is even older though. I think that's probably like version 2 or 3, so that was before the Microsoft Home stuff. And then I do also have a sealed copy of Microsoft PowerPoint for the Macintosh. That was from a guy in the next city over from me who was selling off all of his old vintage Mac stuff. And I also picked up all of his software, or most of it anyway, so that's how I got that. And the next to that is a very old copy of Microsoft Multiplan. That one I've had for years and years and years. It's probably one of the older software titles that I've had in my collection. I don't remember how I got it, but I've probably had it for almost 20 years now. So if we take a look at the boxes that are stacked on top of the Apple ones, the first one there is Mac Arcade Pack. That is under the MacSoft line of games. That is probably the first big box game that I ever owned, and I've had it since around the mid-90s. It was a birthday gift from a friend of mine, and yeah, that is the oldest game that I've had in my physical collection. And I did recently do a video on that one too, so you could find that on YouTube. Next to that, though, is a copy of Spades Deluxe and The Pawn. I have no idea what those are. My coworker just kind of like dropped them off at my desk one day, so he was cleaning out his house. That's how those got in my collection. And next to that, we've actually got 2 sealed copies of Ram Doubler. One of them you might not really be able to see that well because it's behind the metal shelf. Those were from that local guy selling off all of his Mac stuff. So the version of Ram Doubler, I think it's like version 2 or something. But yeah, they're sealed, so I figured, what the hell, add them to my collection. And at some point I might try to sell one of them, but I don't know. They're small boxes, so I can just easily keep them where they are. Now this is where we get to some of the my more treasured items in my collection. I like to collect anything that has the rainbow logo for Apple Computer on there. So I have been trying to pick up any of these software titles from Apple. I was a big Apple fan throughout the 90s, and I never really had any of these software titles back in those days because I was just a poor kid. So yeah, having the opportunity now to pick them up is pretty neat. So starting off on the left, we've got an older copy of Apple Hypercard. The version of Hypercard it's maybe version 1.2 or something like that. The requirements are like a Macintosh Plus or Macintosh SE. So it's an older version of it. Next to that is a sealed copy of At Ease. I already did a video covering Apple At Ease, so I might leave that copy there sealed for now. Eventually I'm sure I'll do an unboxing video, but yeah. Next to that, Mac OS 8. I picked that one up on eBay, and it was fairly cheap. I think I only paid about $20 for it, and I think it was from someone in Canada, so the shipping wasn't that bad either. Yeah, I never really had a boxed copy of an operating system before that, so picked that one up. Next to that, Earth Explorer. That's like some sort of educational title, and that is still sealed in box, but I do plan on doing an unboxing and demo of that at some point because it looks like it might be interesting. Next to that is a full box copy of System 7. This is another one of those software titles that I found from the guy locally to me who was selling off all his old Macs. I'm actually pretty glad to have that copy of System 7 because I was using System 7 quite a bit on my first computer, which was a Macintosh 2SI, so having actual boxed copies of System 7 variations makes me happy. And because, as you can see next to that, we do also have Macintosh System 7.5. That big box was, it's not in the greatest shape, so when I saw that on eBay from another person in Canada, it wasn't, it was a little more than I want to pay, but I threw a lower offer in there for what I was willing to pay, and they accepted, so that's how I got that. And then of course next to that is a copy of System 7.1. And that was also on eBay for, I think, fairly cheap. But yeah, that's, I think, pretty much covers most of my System 7 collection. I am looking to probably get System 7 Pro at some point, but it's not a huge deal. So I do also have a copy of ClarisWorks shoved on the shelf there. That ClarisWorks is, I think it's version 2.1 or something like that, which is the same version I remember using back in elementary school in the 90s. So that copy there is another one of those software titles that I picked up locally. Quite glad to have that in my collection. Obviously I already had access to like old digital copies of ClarisWorks, but having it full box is it's nice. And next to that is a really large box of Hypercard. I think that's version 2.3 or 2.4 or something like that. That was a more recent eBay acquisition, and I think it was also from someone in Canada, so the shipping wasn't too bad and the price was actually decent, so yeah, pick that up. Next to that, though, is a copy of Duke Nukem 3D, and this is the Macintosh version of the game, and that's probably why I was able to get it for a half-decent price. I picked that up on eBay from the same person who had the Mac OS 8 software, and I bought them both at the same time, so I was able to save a little money on shipping. And the game itself, I think I sent in an offer for $20 and they accepted it. So yeah, I got a copy of Duke Nukem 3D for the Mac for 20 bucks. So yeah, can't complain there. The PC version of it is is way overpriced for what I'm willing to pay, so yeah. Next to that, though, we do have 2 different copies of the print shop, and then also I've got a copy of like the print shop companion. Story here is one of the copies of the print shop is for the Mac, and the other copy, as well as the companion, is for the Apple II. The Mac version, I can't remember exactly where I got that from. Might have been just a local find. The Apple II version of it, though, that was on eBay for something like $10 from someone not far from me, so it was also really cheap shipping. And I don't think there was any other bidders on it, so I just threw a bid on there just for the sake of, you know, I don't mind having it, so. But yeah, that's how I ended up with it. And then right beyond that, we've got some sort of golf game. It's Lynx Pro for the Macintosh. I like golf games on the computer, although I'm not a huge fan of playing golf in real life. I can't remember how I got that one. I think it might have been super cheap on eBay, or it's another one of those games that my coworker just like left on my desk. And next to that, we've got a copy of Africa Trail. That box there came from the local Value Village. It is still sealed in box. I probably didn't pay more than $5 or $6 for it. That one's actually Mac or Windows, but it's on the shelf with Mac stuff because I have very limited space on my software titles collection here. And at the very end there is Hyper Studio. I'd never really heard of that before, but it was part of the pile of software I picked up from a guy who was unloading all of his old Macs. So I think it's something similar to Hypercard, but I've never personally used it. At some point I'll probably take a look at it. Alright, so on the next shelf here, from the left, we've got a copy of Netscape Navigator. I bought that on eBay for pretty cheap, and it was actually new in box, and I did do an unboxing and demo video of that recently. So yeah, that was neat to add to my collection. I was a big user of Netscape back in the 90s. Next to that is some title called Creations. I have no idea what it is, some sort of print-related software title. That was, I think, from a thrift store down in the Vancouver area that I was checking out when the last time I was down there. And I didn't really find anything else on those trips, so whatever I did see, I figured I would just pick up for cheap, probably like $5. Next to that is a copy of WordPerfect. Apparently it's the upgrade, and it is version 5.2. That big box I think I've probably had for years. Not entirely sure how I got it. Back in the day, I do remember a couple users on my peer-to-peer server that would actually donate random things to me, like copies of old software. So that's probably how I got that. Next to that is Corel Printhouse Magic. I don't really care about that, but it was, I think that was about $2 from a local thrift store. So I think that was the only thing I found there on that particular trip, so I figured I would just buy it. Next to that is Print Shop Deluxe. That is a title that I figured I would add to my collection just because I remember using that way back in the day. That is, I think, from a local thrift store, probably another $5 or so. Next to that is Print Artist. That was from a thrift store in Vancouver, and I had never really heard of it before, but I did see the Maxis logo on it, which caught my eye, and that's why I bought it. I think it was about probably $5 at the local thrift store. If we quickly jump to the 2 boxes that are on the top of the shelf there, I've got a copy of Command and Conquer. I remember playing that back in, I think probably the early 2000s or late 90s. I don't remember when the game actually came out, but yeah, I remember playing that on like an old Pentium, so yeah, I figured I'd pick that up for cheap on eBay. Next to that, though, on the top there is the Star Trek 25th Anniversary. That was another one of those local finds at a thrift store, and that was $10 for that game. And I didn't really have any intention of buying it on eBay, but finding it locally for that price, can't complain there. But if we jump back down to next to that Print Artist title is a copy of Maximizer. I didn't care about finding that at all, but that was $1.50, I believe, from one of the local thrift stores. That's actually the only thing I have ever found there that was worth buying. I really had no need for it, but for $1.50, it's like, I might as well. Next to that is a sealed copy of Dino Park Tycoon. That, I think, was from the local thrift store, the Value Village. So probably about $5 to $8 around that range. Next to that is F1 World Grand Prix. I'd never heard of that game before. I didn't really care too much about finding it, but that was probably about $5 at the local thrift store, so whatever. Next to that, Johnny Mnemonic, the interactive action movie. So that, I think, was on eBay for super cheap, like probably not even $10. And I think that was from somewhere close to me, so shipping was also pretty cheap. That's still sealed in box. Yeah, I only bought it because I was super bored at the time and I was browsing eBay for pretty much my entertainment, so that's how I ended up with that. Next to that, though, is a copy of Football Pro 95. That's part of the Sierra family, and I only bought that because it was the same game that we had back in my family 486 days. I probably played it a couple times myself, but it was a game that my dad used to play on the 486, so that's why he bought it for himself. But because it was a game that we did have back in those days, that is the reason I bought it, to kind of relive that experience. And also that's the reason I have the Dinosaur Adventure game next to that. I did also do a YouTube video on that game. It's, well, I wouldn't really call it a game. It's kind of like an educational title. But yeah, I did a video on that, and that is the reason I have that copy there. Next to that, Pga Tour Golf 486. Yeah, nothing much to say there. It's another golf game that I figured I would play around with on the computer. Now we're going to get into the sim games, it looks like. So we've got Sim Farm. That is a game I did briefly play probably a few times back in the 90s. And I figured I wouldn't mind having a boxed copy. I think I did do a YouTube video on that as well. It's not exactly one of my more favorite games, but yeah, I did want to collect some of the sim games, so I ended up with that. Next to that, though, is a boxed copy of Sim City. It's not the original box design, it's like the later design. Didn't really matter to me that much, but that I did actually find at the local Value Village. I believe they were asking about $20 for it, but the box and the contents were in pristine condition. So yeah, I figured it was a good enough deal. And the copy of SimCity 2000 next to that, that was at the same time as well. So they were selling SimCity and SimCity 2000. It was like a bundle deal. I think it was about $20 a piece. And yeah, the condition on those is excellent, so couldn't argue with that price. Next to that, though, is Sim Tower. I did play that on my old Macintosh a lot, so I did want to have a boxed copy of that just to say I have it. And that was from eBay. I think it was maybe about $25 or so. Yeah, not too bad. Next to that, though, is Lynx LS. That looks like the 1998 edition. Just another golf game that was probably dirt cheap, which is how I got it. So we jump down to the next shelf, which originally was a selection of IBM and Microsoft operating systems, but because I was running low on space, there's a couple games that are shoved in the top there. On the left side, the very top, there's a copy of Vengeance of Excalibur, it looks like. That's an old DOS game. That was one of the finds from the local thrift store. That was $10 for that game. I'd never heard of it before, but couldn't argue with the price. Same deal next to that is Star Trek V, The Final Frontier. I'm assuming it is somehow based on the movie, and that was also $10 at the thrift store. I've never played it before, but I might check that out at some point. If we look below that, though, we've got 2 copies of OS2 Warp. They're both version 3, but the difference between the blue and the red, one of them is, it's like the full install as an operating system, whereas the red copy installs over top an existing Windows or DOS install or something like that. I've been meaning to do a video on that at some point, but my experience with OS2 is rather limited, so haven't done that yet. Next to that, though, I have 2 copies of Microsoft DOS 4.01. Those 2 copies I've had for years and years. Probably, I wouldn't be surprised if I've had them for 15 years now, maybe. I'm not sure. But yeah, next to that, we've got, let's see, IBM DOS version 5. I don't remember how I got that. I've probably had it for years as well. Next to that, though, is a copy of Microsoft Windows NT Workstation. I think that was a place I used to work at was throwing out all of their old server garbage, and part of that pile of crap was a copy of Windows NT. So I figured I'd grab that before I went into the garbage. And then next to that, there's a little small copy of like Microsoft MS-DOS 6.2. It's just the user manual with the floppy disks, not a full box. But next to that, though, is Microsoft Workgroup add-on for MS-DOS. That is networking software for MS-DOS, I believe. And that was also from one of my old employers. Picked that off the garbage pile. So moving on, at the very top there is a copy of Star Control from Accolade. That is also another one of the games I picked up at the local thrift store for 10 bucks. It's a game I've never played before, but I figured what the hell, might as well add it. Below that, though, we take a look at, we've got a copy of MS-DOS version 5, still in the box. That I've probably had for years. I think a lot of my old copies of DOS I've had since way back in the day when people were sending me old operating systems for my collection. Same deal, next to that is a copy of Microsoft Windows version 3.0. I have a feeling I've had that for years and years. Next to that, though, is a sealed copy of Microsoft Windows version 3.1. I bought that on eBay because I had used version 3.1 extensively in the 90s, and I didn't have a copy full in box, so I wanted to get that. That was, I think, the cheapest copy that I could find on eBay, and I think I'll probably do a full unboxing and install video at some point. So next to that, though, is Windows for Workgroups version 3.11. That, I think, is the actual version of Windows that I used on my family 486 back in the 90s before we installed Windows 95. So I did also want to have a copy of that as well. And next to that, obviously, we do have Windows 95 and Windows 98. Both of those are the upgrade versions. I wanted them in my collection, and I wasn't willing to really pay a whole lot of money for those copies of the software, because if I ever need to install it, I just use my own media. So I just picked up the absolute cheapest copies I could find on eBay, and that ended up being the upgrade copies. So that's how those ended up there. And at the bottom shelf there, we've got, starting off with, looks like Cutthroats. It's some sort of pirate game. That was from Value Village. That was like $5. I bought it at the same time as a couple other games, and I figured I might as well. Next to that, Total Mayhem. I think that's like some sort of, I don't know, it looks a little cheesy from the graphics on there. That is still sealed in box. That was like $5 from the local Value Village. I think I bought it just to see how ridiculous the game might actually be. Yeah, $5, I mean, I was okay with wasting that sort of money, but yeah, I'll do a video on that at some point. Next to that is the Crystal Key. I had never actually heard of that game before, but I did pick that up from a store called Free Geek in Vancouver. And I was there looking for old computers, but they didn't really have anything that was available for the general public. So I looked at their software collection, and I picked that up because it was probably less than 10 bucks, and otherwise it would have been a waste of a trip, so yeah, I had to leave with something. Next to that, though, is a game called Stronghold. And it says on there it's a castle sim. And I like that concept of game, and I did actually do a YouTube video on that game, and you know, it's decently fun. I actually enjoyed it. And that was from Value Village. That was probably like $5. I hadn't heard of it before I bought it, but I am glad I did, so. Next to that is Trophy Bass 2. That is sealed in box. It's a Sierra game, which is the only reason I bought it, because I don't care about fish at all. So that was like maybe $3 or $4 from Value Village. So that's in my collection just because it says Sierra on it. Next to that, though, we do have a couple of Microprose games. We've got Silent Service 2 and Red Storm Rising. The Silent Service 2 You might be able to make out the price tag on the very top of the box there. It was $5.99 from Value Village. And that's one of the earlier software titles that I ever found at the Value Village. And I think it was actually shoved away in the board game section. So I was watching a lot of the LGR thrift videos, and he always talks about making sure to check out the board game section for big box titles. And that's exactly where I found that one. So that was neat. But the other game there, the Red Storm Rising, I found that in the local classifieds. I don't expect to find old software there at all. But that was in the local classifieds, and I think they were asking like $8 for it. So I figured, yep, might as well go pick that up. And next to that is Baldur's Gate. I've heard of the game before. I've never really played it. The only reason I picked it up is that's from one thrift store locally that I don't often go to, but they have the absolute cheapest prices. Like that big box game there was $1. So I figured I would just buy it so I could leave the store with something. So if we take a look at the two games on the top there, we've got a sealed copy of Police Quest SWAT. That's a Sierra game. I found that on eBay for fairly cheap. I think that I must have paid maybe about $25 for it. And I figured it was a game I'd like to try at some point, and it being sealed in box was just a bonus. I'll figure I'd do a video on that at some point. Next to that, though, is a copy of Monopoly Tycoon. I don't really care about that. It was extremely cheap, though, from a thrift store. I don't know if it was a local thrift store to me or if it was one I was visiting in Vancouver. But yeah, it was pretty cheap, and that's pretty much the only reason I bought it. Moving back down, we've got next to Baldur's Gate, we've got a copy of, looks like The Legend of Robin Hood. It's an older Sierra game. That was from the local Value Village, and I was kind of surprised to see a game that old there, and not in their locked up display case as well. I think that was about $5, so that was a bit of a surprise. Next to that, though, Microprose game, F-15 Strike Eagle. That, along with a couple of other games next to it, such as Falcon, and next to that is Top Gun. Those are flight sim games, or some sort of flight action fighter type games. Picked those, I think all three of those up on eBay, because I like that genre of game, and I figured I would try those games at some point. Next to that, looks like Jack Nicklaus, some sort of golf game from Accolade. Yeah, basically picked it up because it was cheap on eBay and because it was golf related. And for some reason I like having golf games, I just don't really like playing golf. Next to that, though, a game I'd never heard of before, but I think that's from Mindscape or something like that. Looks like Angel Devoid. Despite the fact that it has a Value Village price tag on it, I think I bought that on eBay for more than that. Yeah, it was still cheap enough, though, so. Next to that, looks like it's a game called Outcast. I don't really remember how I got that. I think it must have been from a local thrift store for dirt cheap, because I'd never heard of it. I think it might have been maybe like a couple dollars at most. So yeah, next to that we've got Empire Earth. That was also from a local thrift store because I don't think I had any interest in that game before. But it is a Sierra game, so I picked it up. I think it was probably like $1 or $2 as well. So yeah, not bad pricing. Next to that, we do have two copies of Chessmaster. First copy there is Chessmaster 3000, and then we've got a copy of Chessmaster 2100. The 3000 version I bought on eBay for fairly cheap, but I picked it up because it was a game that we did have on my family 486 back in the 90s. And I'm fairly certain it was that version of it. But yeah, I picked it up because I remember actually playing it on the 486. Next to that, the version 2100. That was also from the local Value Village. I just happened to stumble across it in the board game section of the thrift store. And it was like $5, so I consider that to be a good find. Next to that is a game called, looks like Spearhead. I've never heard of it before. That I'm assuming was a local thrift store find for maybe a couple dollars, and that's how I ended up with it. So now we're moving on to a bunch of titles that they're not really that important to me, but yeah, this particular shelf of titles, mostly just miscellaneous crap from thrift stores or whatnot. But at the top there, we do have a copy of Tornado. It's some sort of flight simulator game. That I paid a little bit more for. It was $25 from the Free Geek store in Vancouver. It's a bit more than I'd usually pay for a game in person, but yeah, I think it was a good enough price for what I was looking for, so added that. But next to that on the top, of Print Shop Deluxe CD Ensemble. That was like $5 at a local thrift store, so what the heck. But on the actual shelf there, starting off the left, we've got a sealed copy of like Monopoly. I think I only picked that up because it had the Westwood Studios logo on it, the same people who made Command and Conquer, so I thought that was weird, and bought it just because, probably like $5. Then we got Microsoft Mech Commander 2. That was a cheap find at the local thrift store. I'd never played it before, but maybe it was only a couple dollars, so yeah. I got more copies of WordPerfect, nothing special there. That squished yellow box is some sort of Symantec software. That was just kind of a part of a bundle of other crap I was getting, so that's the only reason I have it. And then we've got a bunch of other random crap like key fonts for Windows 3.1, and then we've got another thing, As Times Go. No idea what these are. I probably picked them up for a couple bucks at thrift stores. Same deal with the Floor Plan Plus 3D. I think that was like $2 at a local thrift store, and I really only bought it because it had that Windows, the old Windows logo on there, so yeah, old enough software title. Next to that is Quarterdeck Internet Suite. That was from the local Value Village, and it's like 90s internet tools. I think there's probably a copy of Gopher in there and stuff like that. So I figured I would do a video on that at some point. Just haven't got around to doing that yet, though. Moving on with the random crap, though, I've got a few of these TLC titles. So at the very top there is Math Rabbit. No idea what it is. But then back down on the main shelf there is Calendar Creator Plus and Super Art Pack. Yeah, these are probably like I paid a couple bucks for them at the thrift stores. Don't know what they are. Who cares? Same deal with these Swift titles. We've got like 1,000 best games for Windows and 3D World Atlas. And like, yeah, I think these were fairly cheap at the thrift store. Don't really care about them. Most of these other things were just random finds from the local Value Village. Things that aren't really worth any money to anybody, but they were like a couple bucks a piece, and I figure they might be fun subjects for videos, so yeah. And moving on to the last shelf I've got here. I'll try to cover this pretty quick. At the very top, we've got a game called Talisman. I've never heard of it, but it was a local thrift store find. That was 10 bucks, can't complain there. Below it is a sealed copy of Microsoft Works. And that's the Windows 95 era, so it's got that cloud-looking box design. That was cheap on eBay, and I picked it up specifically because I wanted a bunch of Windows 95 era stuff, so that's how I ended up with that. Next to it at the top there, it looks like a game called Homeworld. I think I've heard of that before, but I've never played it myself. But that was also a $10 find at the local thrift store, so can't complain. Below that, though, is a copy of Command & Conquer Red Alert, and I bought that on eBay because Red Alert is a game I also played quite a bit on an old Pentium back in the day, so wanted to get that. Below that, though, starting off the left, we continue on with my Aldous software. We've got a copy of PageMaker, copy of Persuasion. I'll be doing videos on that at some point. Next to that, X-Tree Gold. That was just kind of in a bundle of crap from a guy selling all of his old Macs, and that was just part of the bundle, so I've never used it before. Same deal. Next to that, though, is PC-DOS 6.1. I think I specifically wanted that one, though, from the guy's collection of software, so that's how I ended up with that. Next to that, Unixware. I think that was from a coworker who just kind of left it on my desk. I don't know how he got it, but yeah, that's how I got it. Next to that, though, is GOS, or GEOS, however you say it. That's like an operating system type thing for the Commodore 64, I think. That was, I think, $15 at the local Value Village, and I figured I'd try it someday, but I haven't got around to it yet. But the last two titles there, we've got Turbo C++, and we've got a copy of PC Tools. Those were also from the local guy who was selling all of his old Macs. So he had all of this old DOS software as well. So yeah, that's how I ended up with that stuff. But I think that pretty much wraps up all of the box software that I keep on display. I actually have a few more titles that I have in storage compartments in my house. I have a couple 3DO games that I picked up from Value Village and other random stuff that isn't really that important. But I also have a lot of jewel case software that I don't keep on display. And that stuff I might try to look at some point, but it's really not that interesting, and I actually do have multiple bins of it, so it's a lot to cover. But yeah, that is actually all of my box software on display. So this was a super long video, but I hope you enjoyed it. Thanks for watching.